Tonight I want to talk just briefly about intake manifold pressure temperature sensors on the, they're on the mid-range and the X, the ones that we're referring to. And there's another sensor that looks just like those sensors, has the same number of pins in it, but it doesn't bolt into the intake manifold at all. And they look alike except for the part numbers that are different. So tonight I wanted to take a look at what those sensors are, and I'm going to bring up a picture that has 4 sensors in it. And many moons ago there was a early sensor that they obsoleted completely because there was a problem on the board with, I think it was a diode that would fail, and then you would get erratic boost readings. So instead of trying to fix stock and redesign, they just scrapped that one and they redesigned. And they also went from trying to handle all the engines with one sensor to dividing them into 2 groups. So that's what we're going to take a look at tonight. Why is this important to you? Because if your truck's running okay or your machine's running okay, and then all of a sudden you've got a fault code, or you have low power and you get it diagnosed and they tell you that, oh, the boost pressure sensor failed, and they pop a new sensor in there, then you take off and you're going and it's running, but the old girl just doesn't seem to have what she used to have. This could be the reason why. So let's take a look. So a sensor's a sensor's a sensor, right? That looks the same, it'll fit. So pressure sensors for the intake air system. Below, all 4 look alike, but one bolts into the intake piping at the air filter, the clean air outlet. And I see that mostly on the mid-range engines. I don't remember seeing it on an X15 yet, but I see it a lot on the B67s on a smaller horse like that are in the box trucks. I also see that on yard horses, the spotters, whatever you want to call it. Those are lower horsepower Bs. And they're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone there. They are checking, when you turn the key on, that sensor that bolts in the intake piping by the air filter actually is the barometric pressure sensor when the engine's not running. And that's where it gets its value to 0, all the sensors. And then once the engine starts, that part of the sensor becomes, they call it a pressure sensor, but it's basically a flow sensor, or a vacuum flow, and it does measure the temperature of the air. I don't believe it measures humidity, but it does measure, I think it calculates flow by the vacuum that it feels in that intake pipe. So the other sensors that you see are boost sensors, and they measure pressure. Now, if you get your boost pressure sensor changed and you have fault code 125, 222, 743, and you can see the rest of the list there, either active all the time or coming and going active, you experience low power, you have white smoke problems when it's cold, you can have engine misfire problems when it's cold, and you'll have after-treatment performance complaints. Now, what is an after-treatment performance complaint? Well, typically it's the engine's regenerating way too much. That would be a typical after-treatment performance complaint that a driver would have if he didn't have faults. So if we look down a little farther, the first column is the original old part numbers. And you might want to make a note of that top one, which is, if you look to the far right, it says barometric air pressure and turbocharger compressor intake pressure, because that's a hard part number to find in the Cummins part system. It's just not, for some reason, because it goes in the air filter housing, and that's an OEM part, they don't show it. But if you know the part number and type it in, it comes up a good part number. So if somebody scans their truck with a scanner and gives you a generic fault code, and it ends up being the fault code for that barometric air pressure sensor, and they tell you, well, I'm headed your way, can you get one and put it in? And then you go, oh yeah, give me your engine number, and then you go look it up. Guess what? You're not going to find it. I've spent a long time, made phone calls, and if you're going to find it at all, as of this date, you're going to have to call Cummins and they'll have to look it up for you. Now then, you see alternate part numbers? Those are actually the new part numbers for those sensors. And as you can see, go to the far right again, and the middle one, it says intake manifold pressure on a 6.7 liter or smaller engine. What's smaller than that? Well, you've got the 5.9, you've got the 3.8, the 2.8, they've got the 3.3, but that engine, as of about January of 2024, went out of production. There'll be parts available for a while, but they're obsoleting that engine, and they're going to fill its place with either the 2.8 or the 3.8. There's also still the 4.5B. So there's plenty of choices there. But so that middle sensor would go on a 6.7, the 5.9, the 4.5, and on down. Next line down, intake manifold pressure on 8.3 liter or larger. So the B7's big brother, the ISC or the ISL or the L9 or the X15, ISX, ISX12, those engines all take that bottom part number, and they measure basically 13 inches of mercury all the way to 150 inches of mercury. And if you look up, you'll see that other sensor measures only 13 to 62. So that's why if you put the center sensor in the high horsepower engine where the 150 inches of mercury sensor belonged, you'll have low power because the ECM will only ever see 62 inches of mercury, and it's not going to give you any more fuel. That's it. You're done. So just something to keep in the back of your head if you have trouble with that intake manifold pressure sensor. If you look these up by engine number, the boost sensors will always be correct. They're in there. They're available to find. A lot of times you have to go look either in the photo of the ECM, electronic control module, in the new Cummins part system. They seem to lump 90% of their sensors in with the ECM because the sensors are electronic devices, as is the ECM. The only other sensor that they kind of detach from that sometimes is the inlet knock sensor. And the outlet knock sensor, you always find that with the after treatment system in the parts book. Okay, thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe. Have a good week. See you next time.